extreme heat.
Brutal heat wave.
Heat apocalypse. Hottest day ever recorded in Britain.
Dangerous wildfires and truly record-breaking temperatures.
Soaring temperatures are linked to several deaths.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. The UK is having one of its hottest summers ever, which is great for some, especially if you're on holiday. The record temperatures feel more like Spain or Italy. Perfect weather for ice cream. However, there is a downside. Over a dozen people have died as a direct consequence of the heat, and some of the UK's infrastructure, from runways to railways, have melted or caught fire. It's even worse in mainland Europe. The continent is also having one of its hottest summers ever, and the death toll there is over 1,000 in some countries. Seems like Europe needs to get its act together to deal with the rising temperatures. Perhaps we can learn from super hot places like Doha and Texas. We'll hear from a couple of climate experts and architects in a moment. But first, let's have a look at what's been going on around Europe. The UK has seen heat waves before. Just ask your parents or grandparents about the record-breaking summer of 1976. Some say it was a glorious time, others say it was all a bit much. The 76 heat wave may have been longer than we've seen so far in 2022, but back then the temperature peaked at 35.9 degrees centigrade, whilst this year in July it peaked at 40.3 degrees, the highest temperature ever recorded in the UK. And then if we compare 1976 to this year around the world, we see in 1976 it was a freak Western European phenomenon. But this year's heat wave has been seen across the entire globe. Unlike 76, there's nothing uncommon about it.
The climate change projections are revealing even darker scenario from the last decades.
Climate scientists say that the larger point is that the scorching summers are now the new norm and not as rare as they were in the 1970s. This chart shows you how often a year has been hotter than average since 1876. The big block of red spikes is the last few decades. And the simple fact is that much of Europe's infrastructure just isn't built for extreme heat. So, what do? Because if we're being realistic, switching to electric cars, avoiding flights and eating fewer steaks just isn't going to work fast enough. Governments are going to need to get pragmatic, because here are some of the problems that are baked in, pun intended. Many European buildings, especially in the north, are built to trap heat, which is not great news at 42 degrees. Dark roads and buildings store heat during the day and release it at night, which is why you're left to sleep in a pool of sweat. And there's not enough shade, trees or water in cities, especially in northern Europe. They're afflicted with what have been called urban heat islands, which, despite the enticing name, is not somewhere you want to go on holiday. They are, in fact, heat traps. These cities are so hot that people are actually dying, and this will likely get worse as temperatures continue to rise. The French newspaper Le Monde reports that in Lyon, Toulouse or Paris, the difference in temperatures between city centres and the more spread out and leafy suburbs can be as much as 10 degrees. Mercifully, French city councils have made entry to museums and other air-conditioned public places free of charge. They've also extended pool opening hours. In parts of Spain, entire areas, especially in the centre of the country, in regions like Castile and Leon, well, they've suffered severe depopulation, with climate change doubling the amount of rainless and arid land in just 2 decades. In Britain, roads, airport runways and rail tracks literally melted in the July heat, and some burst into flames. So adapting where we live to these kinds of temperatures is not just about buying a fan or maybe putting in some air conditioning. Assuming the scientists are right, governments need to start making some big changes quickly to deal with a future that is projected to be much, much hotter. We'll bring in our experts in just a moment to answer some of those questions, including someone who used to advise President Barack Obama. But first, let's hear from Joe Public. And we sent our producer out once again to ask Londoners what they remember about the hot summer of '76.
It's not 1976 because we never had a 1974 and we didn't have a 1978. We went back to fairly miserable, changeable summers. This summer seems to have been permanent for about 4 or 5 years. I can't remember the last time it rained, even in the winter.
The climate's been changing since the Ice Age. The ice is still melting from millions of years ago. That's why we've still got the ice. I mean, at one point it was about 5 to 6 miles deep, the ice. It's always melting, the climate's always changing. I think it's slightly accelerating. I think this will become more common. but it's not a new thing.
A freak of nature, I suppose, but it wasn't very long. But this is what we're experiencing now is pretty unprecedented, really, and I think it's a sign of times to come, and it's definitely climate change.
We'd mind if it rained, as we do. We'd mind if it's too hot. We'd mind if it's cloudy. We'd mind if it's a perfect day. We'd find a fault. It's guaranteed.
Well, that stiff upper lip is a good idea in many cases, but not when it comes to dealing with global warming. At a time like this, it's better to bring in the experts. Alice Hill is a climate risk analyst and former special assistant to President Barack Obama. Ella Gilbert is a climate scientist at the British Antarctic Survey, and she just came back from a visit to the Arctic. And we also have two innovative architects. Ashley Heeren focuses on adapting buildings to deal with the heat and recently printed an entire house. And Mick Pearce is all about biomimicry and is responsible for this building in Zimbabwe, which is based on how termites build their homes. Welcome to all of you. Ella Gilbert, I'd like to start with you. I've lost count of the number of times I've heard people or seen them tweeted out that, you know, the United Kingdom has been through hot summers before, and in fact it's nothing, not a patch on 1976, and all we did then was have more ice cream and relax on the beach. What is the problem? What's your message for them, Ella?
It's undeniable that 1976 was a hot spell and it was a hot summer. But the fact of the matter is that climate change is making extreme heat happen more often. It's making heat waves much hotter and more intense when they do occur, and they're becoming longer. So we're starting to see these happening time after time. I mean, we've had 2 heat waves in just a month, and that should be testament to the fact that we are seeing more and more of these extreme events.
And a lot of people will say, so what? You know, actually, we quite like it hot in this country. It means we don't have to go abroad. It feels like we've gone to the south of France. What are you worried about?
Well, naturally, hot weather isn't necessarily a problem in and of itself, but extreme heat can kill people, and particularly the most vulnerable people, so the very young, the very old, those with pre-existing health conditions. And it's the sort of extreme heat that we're talking about that's really concerning. It's not the kind of lovely 27, 28 degree sort of periods that you come to expect from being on holiday, but it's when you have to do your normal everyday life, you have to go to work, you have to do those sorts of activities in much higher temperatures than you're used to, that really puts strain on people's bodies, particularly if they're already vulnerable.
And what does your work at the British Antarctic Survey tell you about the temperatures that the United Kingdom and indeed Europe should start to plan for?
Well, my work at the British Antarctic Survey shows that the polar regions are warming much faster than anywhere else on Earth. And that actually has implications for us in Europe and indeed anyone living all over the world. Because, of course, the polar regions contain vast quantities of ice. If that ice melts, it contributes to sea level rise. And about half of the world's population lives near coastlines, which means that sea level rise has an impact on so many billions of people that it's just we can't ignore it, you know.
Thank you for that. Alice Hill, you were a special assistant to President Barack Obama from 2009 to 2013, and you led the Department of Homeland Security's first ever climate adaptation strategy. What kind of initiatives did you put forward in that role, and were they effective?
Well, we were looking at the question, did this huge sprawling security agency, the Department of Homeland Security, born after the events of September 11th, need to even consider climate change impacts? But of course, we've seen this year and in recent years that climate change impacts flash flooding, extreme heat, higher wind speeds, bigger, more intense storms. We need to do a lot of planning, and that's what we concluded at the Department of Homeland Security. We need to understand our vulnerabilities, and then we need to figure out how do we build higher, stronger, or really move out of certain regions as they become too dangerous with worsening extremes from global warming.
And do you see any parallels with what's happening in Europe?
Oh, absolutely. I think all of us are a bit stunned by how quickly our climate is changing. The models didn't predict that we would see these extremities so early. And we have infrastructure we share with you in Europe that we have infrastructure built for the past. All of our building codes and land use practices assumed that the climate was stable. We've had a stable climate up till now, but now we're moving into a period of instability. And lo and behold, we see rivers in Europe shutting down for shipping. We see wildfires destroying whole communities. And we've just heard sea level rise will be relentless going forward. So we're going to see a lot of collapse of critical infrastructure, which puts lives, livelihoods, whole communities at risk.
In the past couple of days, we've seen that the US Senate has passed an enormous $370 billion climate bill expected to cut the US greenhouse gas emissions by around 40% below the 2005 levels by the end of this decade. What are the main pillars of that bill?
Well, it's heavily focused on clean energy. You know, this is a very exciting development. 2 weeks ago, I think all the talking heads would have told you it would be impossible to get where we are, but we have the largest investment in climate action in US history. It gives a lot of money to low carbon technologies. We see a green bank, something that has been long dreamed of to finance clean energy technologies. There'll be tax credits to boost electric vehicle sales, climate smart agricultural practices and clean vehicle manufacturing facilities get a lot of money. We'll see a push for heat pumps like you've had in the UK. We'll see additional efforts to honor our methane pledge made in Glasgow last year, the global methane pledge to cut methane emissions, that highly damaging form of greenhouse gas emissions that causes more rapid heating than carbon. And then we have a little bit for resilience. So we have some for fire resilient forests. We have a big wildfire problem here, and then a lot towards drought. We also have a huge drought problem here, the worst drought in 1,200 years in our American West.
I noticed the bill only passed by 51 to 50 votes, and it took the Vice President, Kamala Harris, to cast her vote to get it passed. Does that mean that, obviously, that the Senate is divided, but does that mean the country is divided about whether this bill is going to be good news or not?
Yes, the country is divided on party lines as to the need for action on climate. It's very stark in the polling, and many Republicans do not see, some don't think that climate change is a challenge or occurring, and some don't think it's urgent at all. The polling for the Democratic Party is that it's urgent and it's a big problem. But you do see that with young people, young Republicans, they are concerned about climate change because, of course, as the climate becomes hotter, they will experience in their lifetimes, long after many of our senators have passed away, they will experience these impacts going forward. So we do see there's big difference in the demographics of who supports climate action.
Ella Gilbert, do you think this bill and initiatives in the United Kingdom and also in Europe are moving fast enough so that these temperatures will either be kind of stopped or even reversed, or is it not moving fast enough?
I think it's really fantastic to see that the kind of landmark ruling in the US that's just happened has gone through. And I think it's really great that many governments all over the world are starting to implement these sorts of climate action policies. But the science is also very clear that we are not doing enough and we are not doing it fast enough. So I think whilst this is a really amazing first step, we need to really follow through with this, continue to implement these sorts of policies and actually make sure that they meet those pledges rather than just kind of saying they'll do something.
Okay. Well, if it's not moving fast enough, then let's turn this program towards adapting. And Ashley Heeren, you're an architect in Texas, one of the hottest states in America, and you recently printed an entire house. We're playing some pictures of that now. First of all, did it turn out well?
Yes, we were very pleased with how it turned out. It was an incredible partnership between Lake Flato Architects, the firm that I work with, and Icon Build Technologies, which is a local 3D printing and building automation company in Austin, Texas.
And why is this building better for coping with the heat and indeed with the cold? I mean, you have to accept weather conditions are going to get more extreme in either direction. How does it help?
Absolutely. So we're always looking at ways to further adapt our buildings to deal with more and more extreme conditions. As Anna and Alice have both noted, we know this is happening very rapidly, and we have more extremes than ever before. So building with high thermal mass, which is really an ancient technology, any type of block building or concrete building in the past is using its thermal mass to help slow down the transfer of hot or cold to the inhabitants inside. This 3D printing technology uses that same principle and comes up with really great thermally performing walls.
I understand it's quicker and cheaper than traditional building methods, in other words, using a bricklayer, but When are we actually going to start seeing this used more widely?
The technology is moving quickly. So Icon or another such company that actually builds the robots and does the 3D printing could probably speak to their timelines. But in just the time that we've been working with it, we've seen incredible advances. So as it starts to appear more at scale and we start to see buildings printed in the hundreds rather than one-offs, we will start to see these incredible benefits of moving the construction industry into new and innovative ways. Just as we're talking about working with policy and attacking this problem on all fronts, the construction industry really needs to start innovating and changing some of the ways we've been doing things for hundreds of years.
Just briefly, what else do you do in these hot states like Texas to sort of mitigate the heat that you have to put up with there?
Shade. It's all about creating shade and mitigating the sun. That can create a huge life or death difference for the street experience. We also, in hot, humid climates, really think about ventilation and air movement. So tall openings and breezeways and cuts through the building that allow air. So sun and air sort of drive all the major decisions about building placement and passive design before we even get into the systems in the building. Also elements like integrating water into urban areas and streetscapes, and trees can do much more than any building can actually do to create a more comfortable environment and better cities in the long run.
Got it. Okay, let's skip over to Mick Pearce now in Zimbabwe. You've designed some really fantastic buildings over your career as an architect, Mick. One that springs to mind in particular is the building, the Eastgate, is it the Eastgate Mall, where you looked at what termites were doing and you learned lessons from nature, basically, in order to build that. How did you, what specifically did you take on to build that building?
Well, what's amazing about termites is that they live underground, and they use the thermal mass of the ground to keep cool. But when the temperature above ground gets hotter and hotter, nearer the temperature that they live in, they can't breathe. So they have to build a tower. And this tower is built very like what we've just heard about 3D printing, because the termites are actually blind, and they build this tower, which is a lung. In fact, it's a breathing system. And they build it in the real time as the temperatures change. And the only way of describing it is that the architect for their tower is in fact the sun, or the air movement created by the sun. So that was a great inspiration for me, and I use that all the time when I design buildings.
So your building then, how does it mimic it? What designs?
Well,
yeah.
Well, it has 48 huge chimneys which pull the air out, and they are called solar accelerators. They actually move the air. The thing is, in Africa, where I live, we have to rely on very simple systems. We don't have high tech here, and we have very unfavorable supply of electricity. So we need to use passive systems. So what I do is to use the night air to cool the building for the next day. And I store that cooth, as we call it, in concrete teeth under the floors of the building. So my building has a labyrinth of passages for air to move. And we use a fan to push the air. But the passages for air, including the chimneys, were copied from the forms that termites make under the ground.
Now, Mick, you designed this building, about a quarter of a century ago? Has this technology and design been transferred elsewhere around the world?
Well, we finished it in 1996, and then I went to Australia, to Melbourne, and we did the same approach, but a very different climate, with a different technology and a different culture, if you like. So that had to be a different looking building. And then I went, and getting used to the Melbourne climate was quite difficult compared with Harare's climate. And then I went to an even worse climate in South China, in Dongguan, near Shenzhen and Hong Kong. and we built a dining hall, which again had to deal with the hot and the damp. So there were three completely different climates and different technologies and different cultures. So the building had to change completely. They don't look like each other at all.
Okay. Ashley Heeren, just one last question before we move on to what's happening in Doha. What advice would you give to your counterparts in Europe, architects and town planners and so on, in order to adapt in good time to the rising temperatures?
Let's work together across all disciplines. Again, trees and reforestation of our urban centers and working with smart waterways and great policies. We need all disciplines to come together so that when it comes to the architect and we can actually be thinking about great positioning for the building, we've got the setting that will make it successful in the long term as we deal with more extreme conditions. And let's not be afraid to get adventurous.
Ashley Heeren and all our other guests, thank you so much for your contributions to the Nexus today. Much appreciated. Let's go over to Doha now, one of the hottest cities in the world, and it'll be hosting the FIFA World Cup in November. And even though that's not the hottest time in Doha, it is still really, really warm. But they have a plan to keep those stadia cool. And the man with the plan is Dr Saud Ghani, also known as Dr Cool. Dr Saud, Dr Cool, was that you? Did you give yourself that name?
I've been given that name, so then it went on.
But do you deserve it? Tell me, what is your job there in Doha?
My job that I work as a professor of mechanical engineering at the Department of Mechanical Engineering at Qatar University. But at the same time, when we started to look at the air-conditioned stadiums and how air conditioning in general is important to people, animals, and plants in the region, because our region is typically hot and arid. So they're related to science, and what better than a university to find a lot of science back your plans, and that's what the government did.
But it's an incredible challenge, isn't it? Because you have a very large open area, you have a very hot country, mostly covered in desert. What is your solution, and how effective will it be?
Okay, so the first solution is to understand heat, how heat is being created, trapped, and how heat is to be displaced and moved from one side to another. So we have, like a lot of people, they think that we only air condition the air, but we don't only air condition the air, because even feeling of temperature or the sensation of heat, it depends on a lot of factors. And indoors, completely different from sensation of heat outdoors.
Well, you say the way of cooling the stadia is much more sustainable than traditional methods. I mean, how is that the case?
Okay, so people look at the stadium and they think it's a big volume, and we are air cooling all that volume. We don't need to cool all that volume. I mean, it's not like an airport where you have a big dome of glass and everything is trapped under that dome. So what we are doing is that we're only creating, if you like, a bubble, like not more than 2 meters above where the spectators sit, not more than 2 meters above where the players play, and at the same time keeping that bubble alive all the time, and we're recycling that bubble.
We're only 3 months away till the World Cup. Are all your stadia ready?
All the stadiums were ready, as been announced by the country and the committee who's looking after that about a year ago. We're well ahead of plans, and most of the, except the last one, were integrated already, and big events have been tested and used in international, regional, and local matches as well.
Saud, Qatar is the world's largest emitter of carbon dioxide per capita in the world, and yet FIFA has said that this could be the first carbon neutral World Cup ever. On the other hand, you've got people like Carbon Market Watch, CMW, a non-profit organisation which works closely with the European Union, saying we've looked at the organisers' plans and the projected emissions are likely to have been underreported. What do you make of that? Do you think you are going to be the first carbon neutral World Cup?
For sure, we work for that. I mean, looking after the environment is not only in the Qatar 2022 projects, it's engraved on Qatar National Development Vision 2030. So looking after the environment is an original pillar onto that vision, into Qatar National Vision 2030. So all the energy, or even higher than what we need for running the event, is coming from a solar village, which has been already constructed and is already operating. So the energy that we need is coming from a solar farm, a big solar farm at a village outside Doha. It's called Al Kharsa, and now currently we are providing energy to the grid, and that energy will use it for our event.
That is one thing you certainly don't have a dearth of, and that is sunshine. Dr. Saud Ghani, thank you so much. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but we have. And thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, if you want to see this episode or any of our previous episodes, do go to our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Till next week then, goodbye.